The secure phone rang at exactly 3:47 a.m. Moscow time. The caller ID displayed only a series of encrypted digits that made the duty officer's blood run cold. This was the emergency line reserved for only the most catastrophic scenarios. Within minutes, a convoy of black armored vehicles raced through the empty streets of Moscow, their sirens silent but their urgency unmistakable. In the depths of the Kremlin's most secure bunker, the president sat across from his most trusted security advisor. The man who had built Russia's intelligence apparatus from the ground up, who had survived the chaos of the 1990s and the delicate power transitions that followed. His name was Alexei Volkov, and for 23 years, he had been the keeper of Russia's most dangerous secrets. Now he was gone. The disappearance had been discovered during a routine security check. Volkov's apartment stood empty, his personal effects untouched, but his government-issued secure phone and laptop were missing. More troubling still, the biometric scanners at his office showed his last entry at 11:30 p.m. the previous evening, but no record of departure. What happened next shook the Kremlin to its foundation. A forensic team swept Volkov's office and discovered something that made seasoned intelligence officers pale. Hidden behind a false panel in his desk were documents that should not have existed. Photocopies of nuclear authorization protocols. Detailed schematics of submarine patrol routes. Most damaging of all, a complete roster of deep cover operatives stationed across Western Europe and North America. The president studied the evidence spread across the mahogany table. Each document represented years of careful intelligence work, operations that had cost millions of rubles and countless man-hours to establish. If these materials fell into enemy hands, it would constitute the greatest intelligence disaster in Russian history. Defense Minister Sergei Kozlov cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, we must consider the possibility that this was not a defection but an abduction. Volkov has family. Perhaps he was coerced." The president's expression remained stone cold as he picked up a photograph from the pile. It showed Volkov shaking hands with a man identified in the file as Thomas Richardson, cultural attaché at the British Embassy. The timestamp indicated the meeting had occurred just 3 days earlier. "This was no abduction," the president said quietly. "Look at the dates on these documents. Volkov has been systematically copying our most sensitive materials for months. Perhaps years." FSB Director Natasha Petrov leaned forward. "We've initiated a full audit of his access logs. Preliminary analysis suggests he may have compromised up to 40% of our active intelligence operations." The room fell silent. 40% represented decades of work. Agents who had spent years building their covers, technological advantages that had taken enormous resources to develop, strategic positions that could never be replicated. What made the betrayal even more devastating was Volkov's position within the intelligence hierarchy. As Deputy Director of Foreign Intelligence, he had access to compartmentalized information across multiple agencies. He knew which operations were genuine and which were elaborate deceptions designed to mislead foreign intelligence services. He could separate truth from carefully constructed lies. The president stood and walked to the secure terminal at the far end of the room. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, accessing systems that required his personal biometric authorization. What he saw on the screen confirmed his worst fears. During the past 72 hours, unusual activity had been detected in intelligence networks across Europe and North America. Russian operatives were being arrested or recalled by their handlers. Safe houses were being abandoned. Communication networks that had operated undetected for years were going dark. "They're rolling up our entire European network," the president announced. "Whatever Volkov gave them, they're acting on it immediately." The implications were staggering. Beyond the immediate operational losses, There were strategic consequences that would reshape the global intelligence landscape. Russia's ability to gather intelligence on NATO military preparations would be severely compromised. Economic espionage operations that provided crucial advantages in international negotiations would be exposed. Most critically, early warning systems that monitored Western military activities near Russian borders would be blinded. FSB technical specialist Viktor Medvedev entered the room carrying a sealed briefcase. His face was grim as he approached the conference table. "Sir, we've completed our analysis of Volkov's computer systems. What we found is worse than we initially suspected." He opened the briefcase and removed a tablet computer. The screen displayed a complex network diagram showing data flows and access patterns. Volkov didn't just copy documents randomly. He was methodical, strategic. "Look at this pattern." The diagram revealed a carefully planned intelligence operation spanning nearly 18 months. Volkov had been systematically accessing files related to specific operational areas: nuclear submarine deployments, missile defense systems, cyber warfare capabilities, and deep cover intelligence networks. This wasn't opportunistic, Medvedev continued. Someone was directing him. They knew exactly what to request and when to request it. This level of coordination suggests a sophisticated foreign intelligence operation. Defense Minister Kozlov studied the timeline. The pattern suggests he was activated shortly after the NATO summit in Brussels. That's when Western intelligence agencies would have been most motivated to penetrate our networks. The president returned to his seat, his mind calculating the broader implications. If Volkov had been turned by foreign intelligence, it meant that enemy agencies had successfully penetrated the highest levels of Russian security. More disturbing still, it raised questions about how many other high-ranking officials might be compromised. "Initiate Protocol 7, the president ordered. I want every individual with access to sensitive materials subjected to enhanced security screening. Financial records, communication logs, travel patterns, everything." Protocol 7 was the most comprehensive internal security review in the Russian intelligence apparatus. It would effectively shut down normal operations while every officer with significant access was investigated. The process would take months and would severely impact Russia's intelligence capabilities during a critical period of international tension. What happened next would determine whether Russia could recover from this devastating blow to its intelligence networks. The president activated the secure communication system and began placing calls to intelligence chiefs across the country. Each conversation was brief but urgent. Within hours, emergency protocols were being implemented at intelligence facilities from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok. The manhunt for Alexei Volkov began immediately. FSB teams were dispatched to airports, railway stations, and border crossings. His photograph was distributed to security services across all allied nations. Financial monitoring systems were activated to track any attempts to access his accounts or those of his family members. But the professionals searching for Volkov understood that if he was truly working with a sophisticated foreign intelligence service, he would have multiple escape routes and new identities prepared. Traditional search methods might prove inadequate. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Volkova, Alexei's daughter, contacted authorities after seeing news reports about her father's disappearance. She revealed that her father had been acting strangely for several months, making unusual comments about family security and asking detailed questions about her daily routines. More significantly, she had noticed her father making several unexplained trips to Finland. He claimed these were personal vacation trips, but she found it odd that he never brought back photographs or souvenirs, and he seemed nervous when discussing these travels. Finnish intelligence services were contacted immediately. A review of border crossing records revealed that Volkov had made 6 trips to Finland during the past year, each lasting exactly 3 days. More interesting still, these trips coincided with visits by several Western intelligence officials who had entered Finland on diplomatic passports. The pattern suggested that Finland was being used as a neutral meeting ground for intelligence exchanges. This was a common practice during the Cold War, and it appeared that some agencies were reviving these techniques for modern operations. Finnish authorities agreed to cooperate with the investigation, but their assistance would be limited by legal and diplomatic constraints. They could provide border crossing information and surveillance footage from public areas, but they could not authorize operations against foreign nationals on their territory without compelling evidence of criminal activity. Meanwhile, the damage assessment continued to worsen. Intelligence analysts had identified 47 specific operations that appeared to have been compromised. These included long-term penetration operations against defense contractors in the United States and Britain, economic espionage networks targeting European technology companies, cyber warfare units that had been developing capabilities against critical infrastructure systems, deep cover operatives who had spent years establishing themselves in academic and research institutions. The financial cost of these losses was estimated in the billions of rubles, but the strategic implications were far more serious. Russia's ability to anticipate Western military and political decisions would be severely degraded for years to come. As the investigation deepened, a disturbing pattern emerged. Volkov's betrayal appeared to be part of a broader Western intelligence offensive against Russian networks. Smaller-scale compromises had been detected in other agencies during recent months, but they had been treated as isolated incidents rather than components of a coordinated campaign. The President convened an emergency session of the Security Council to address the crisis. The meeting brought together the heads of all major security agencies, along with key political and military leaders. The discussion was frank and sometimes heated as officials grappled with the scale of the intelligence disaster. Foreign Minister Elena Maximova raised a critical question that had been troubling many in the room. If the West has been planning this operation for months or years, what else might they have in motion? Are we looking at the intelligence equivalent of a first strike? The question hung in the air like a challenge. If Western intelligence agencies had successfully penetrated Russian networks at this level, they might have access to information that could compromise national security in ways that went far beyond traditional espionage. SVR Director Pavel Antonov provided a sobering assessment. Based on what Volkov could have accessed, hostile intelligence services now have detailed knowledge of our intelligence priorities, operational methods, and key personnel. They know how we think, how we plan, and how we execute operations. This gives them enormous advantages in future intelligence battles. The President listened to each briefing with growing concern. The Volkov affair was not just an intelligence failure, it was a fundamental challenge to Russian security doctrine. If the highest levels of the intelligence apparatus could be penetrated so thoroughly, traditional assumptions about operational security would need to be completely reconsidered. Defense Minister Kozlov presented the military perspective. Sir, we must consider the possibility that this intelligence compromise was preparation for something larger. If hostile forces have detailed knowledge of our capabilities and procedures, they may be planning operations that exploit this information. The concern was well-founded. Intelligence superiority often preceded military action. If Western agencies had spent months or years mapping Russian capabilities and weaknesses, they might be preparing for confrontations where this knowledge would provide decisive advantages. What happened next would test every aspect of Russian crisis management capabilities. The President authorized the most comprehensive security review in post-Soviet history. Every intelligence officer with access to sensitive materials would undergo intensive background investigations. Communication systems would be rebuilt from the ground up. Operational procedures that had been in place for decades would be completely redesigned. But these measures would take time to implement, and during the transition period, Russian intelligence capabilities would be severely degraded. This created a dangerous window of vulnerability at a time when international tensions were already elevated. The search for Volkov intensified when Finnish authorities reported unusual activity at a remote airfield near the Russian border. Surveillance footage showed a private aircraft arriving at the facility during one of Volkov's documented visits to Finland. The aircraft's tail number traced back to a shell company registered in Switzerland, but further investigation revealed connections to known intelligence front organizations. More disturbing still, the aircraft had made several flights to various European capitals during recent months, always staying for brief periods before departing. The pattern suggested a sophisticated intelligence shuttle operation designed to move personnel and materials while avoiding traditional border controls. Russian cyber warfare specialists were tasked with penetrating the shell company's computer networks to gather additional intelligence about the aircraft's operations. What they discovered painted a picture of an elaborate intelligence infrastructure that had been operating for years. The shell company was connected to a network of similar organizations across Europe and North America. These companies provided cover for safe houses, communication facilities, and transportation assets used by Western intelligence agencies. The network appeared to be designed specifically for operations against Russian targets. Financial analysis revealed that the network had received funding from sources connected to multiple Western intelligence agencies. This suggested an unprecedented level of cooperation between organizations that had historically maintained strict operational separation. The president studied intelligence reports late into the night, searching for patterns that might reveal the broader objectives behind the Volkov operation. The timing and scope of the intelligence campaign suggested that Western agencies were preparing for a significant shift in their approach to Russia. What became clear was that this was not simply about gathering intelligence for defensive purposes. The systematic nature of the penetration, combined with the immediate operational use of the compromised information, indicated that Western agencies were building capabilities for offensive intelligence operations. The implications were sobering. If hostile intelligence services could penetrate Russian networks this thoroughly, they might also be capable of disrupting critical systems during a crisis. Communications networks, financial systems, and infrastructure controls could all be vulnerable to attack by adversaries who had spent years mapping these systems. Defense preparations began immediately. Critical communications systems were isolated from external networks. Emergency command procedures were activated to ensure continuity of government functions even if primary systems were compromised. Military units were placed on heightened alert status to guard against the possibility that intelligence compromises might be followed by more direct threats. The search for Volkov took a dramatic turn when Swiss authorities reported that the aircraft linked to his escape had landed at a private airfield outside Zurich. Swiss intelligence services, acting on information provided by Russian authorities, conducted surveillance of the aircraft and observed several individuals disembarking, including someone matching Volkov's description. However, by the time Swiss authorities were prepared to take action, the individuals had dispersed into the complex transportation networks of Central Europe. Volkov's trail went cold in the maze of international connections that made modern Europe an ideal environment for sophisticated intelligence operations. The investigation continued, but the focus shifted from capturing Volkov to containing the damage from his betrayal. Intelligence analysts worked around the clock to identify which operations could be salvaged and which would need to be abandoned entirely. The assessment was grim. Nearly half of Russia's intelligence networks in Western Europe would need to be rebuilt from scratch. Operations that had taken decades to establish were effectively destroyed. The financial and strategic costs would impact Russian intelligence capabilities for years to come. But the Volkov affair also revealed important information about Western intelligence capabilities and priorities. The sophistication of the operation, combined with the level of interagency cooperation it required, provided insights into how hostile intelligence services planned and executed major operations. This intelligence would prove valuable in designing countermeasures and protecting future operations from similar penetrations. Russian security services began implementing new protocols based on lessons learned from the Volkov investigation. As weeks passed, the full scope of the intelligence disaster became clear. The betrayal had compromised not just current operations, but also historical intelligence that could be used to identify patterns in Russian operational methods. This knowledge would give Western agencies advantages in detecting and countering future Russian intelligence activities. The president faced difficult decisions about how to respond to what amounted to an intelligence Pearl Harbor. Military retaliation was considered but rejected as too dangerous given the nuclear dimension of any direct confrontation between major powers. Economic responses were limited by Russia's integration into global financial systems. Instead, the focus turned to rebuilding Russian intelligence capabilities with new methods and procedures that would be more resistant to penetration. This would require massive investments in personnel, technology, and training. It would also require fundamental changes in how Russian intelligence agencies operated. The cultural impact within the intelligence community was profound. Officers who had dedicated their careers to building networks and capabilities watched decades of work disappear overnight. Trust between agencies, and even between officers within the same agency, was severely damaged. Rebuilding would require not just new procedures and technologies, but also a restoration of confidence in the security of Russian intelligence operations. This would prove to be one of the most challenging aspects of recovery from the Volkov affair. Months later, as the investigation continued and rebuilding efforts progressed, new information emerged about the scope of Western intelligence operations against Russia. The Volkov affair appeared to be just one component of a much larger campaign that had been developing for years. Intelligence agencies across the Western Alliance had been quietly coordinating their efforts to penetrate Russian networks and capabilities. The level of cooperation and resource sharing was unprecedented in the post-Cold War era. This suggested a fundamental shift in how Western governments viewed the intelligence threat from Russia. The president understood that Russia faced a new kind of intelligence war, one that required new strategies and capabilities to survive and prevail. The old assumptions about intelligence operations would need to be completely reconsidered. What had begun as the investigation of a single defection had revealed the existence of a sophisticated, multi-year intelligence campaign against Russian interests. The implications would reshape Russian security policy for decades to come. The final intelligence assessment painted a sobering picture. Alexei Volkov had been recruited by Western intelligence services at least 2 years before his disappearance. During that time, he had systematically compromised Russian intelligence operations across multiple agencies and geographical regions. The operation that turned Volkov represented one of the most successful intelligence penetrations in modern history. Its impact would be felt for years as Russia struggled to rebuild its intelligence capabilities while defending against ongoing Western intelligence operations. In the end, the Volkov affair became a turning point in the modern intelligence war between Russia and the West. It demonstrated that no intelligence service, regardless of its reputation or security measures, was immune to sophisticated penetration operations. The president's final decision was to authorize a complete restructuring of Russian intelligence agencies. New procedures, new technologies, and new personnel would be required to meet the challenges of modern intelligence warfare. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe to FictionWire Russia. This is a fictional story created purely for entertainment.